Today's cafe is about iC3D. Let's start the presentation. Maybe you were here last time. This time we're going to look at iC3D when we're looking at packaging and 3D visualization. Last time we were looking at the Picador application. Maybe you were here, maybe you weren't. If you weren't, the video is on our YouTube channel, so you can pick it up and you can rewatch it if you missed something. And now we're going to kind of compare the applications and their purposes. The Picador application is completely meant for technical design. So you can draw your CAD design, you can take that CAD design and make a digital prototype of your box. You can see how it works in 3D. That is the point of the Picador application. With iC3D, what we're going to do is try to create a digital photograph. So we're going to take our 3D design and we're going to make it visually as appealing as possible, simulating packaging options, simulating finishing effects for the packaging options, liquids, glass, paper, metal, everything is possible to simulate and to show us what our final design could look like. Then we're going to export the scene we create. So we create a 3D scene, we add all our stuff in it, we can make it look real nice. Then we're going to export this with ray tracing technology. I'm going to explain quickly what ray tracing is further down in the presentation. This will create essentially a photograph, a photorealistic 3D visualization of our packaging with all its components that can be used, for example, in um, marketing campaigns, in packshots for catalogus and everything like that. That wasn't the right word, but okay. We can use these images where you would normally use photography. Of course, working with digital files, it's cheaper than photography in many cases. And at the end, you probably can't tell the difference. So, what can iC3D do for us? This is a list of the main features inside iC3D. I marked in blue the ones we're going to look at today. All the other ones are also things that are possible, but as you see, it's a lot of stuff to go over in just one short hour. Normally, a training for iC3D for the complete application would take 2 days at least. So these are the three things we're going to look at. The Carton fold-up to compare with the Carton that we looked at in Picador, materials and print finishing effects. Specifically, we're going to make our Carton look like Carton. We're going to add finishing effects like embossing and foil to it. And we're going to also use that bottle that I used in Picador as well, and fill that with liquid, the whole fanciness. And then we're going to, at the very end, make a ray traced export of our scene, and we'll see what the final result would be using iC3D. If you're interested in any one of the other features listed here, please do tell us. We can always set up another cafe about another one of these features, or we can have videos on our YouTube channel that specifically explain any one of these. If you want to have another product demo down the line, let us know and we can provide that as well. So, why iC3D? Well, iC3D can basically do any type of packaging. Like I said, we can do carton and paper, we can do glass, we can do metal. All of this is possible. This means we can create bottles, boxes, glasses, uh, bags, everything that you kind of want to see in packaging is possible in iC3D. You can either start from templates, so there are templates to use to make stuff easier, or completely from scratch and basically build your own 3D model that you want to use. Or you can import 3D resources you already have. If you're working with, for example, Coca-Cola, and you want to create something for Coca-Cola, I'm pretty sure that Coca-Cola has 3D assets of their bottles that you can use and import in iC3D. You can customize your own materials. So there is a library with materials, but you can change all of their properties. So if you want to have a liquid, but it has to be less transparent, you can change the transparency. You can change how it interacts with light. Then you can easily add your own artwork, either by simply using PDFs or by using the direct link with the Illustrator plugin, which you will see many times today. Then you can build your scene with a custom background, with custom lighting, and you can then create and export the high resolution ray traced images. Now, I've already used the word ray tracing a few times. It's a bit of a buzzword in gaming and in GPUs these days. What is ray tracing? Well, ray tracing is a way to simulate how light reacts in a scene. In the past, in the classical way, to make stuff look 3D, what you would do is create drop shadows. And these drop shadows are created at the point that you build your scene. You put a source of light somewhere in the space. The source of light interacts with an object in the space and creates a drop shadow. It's basically taking a line cutout of the object and making that as a darker spot on the other side. That can look quite realistic, but it has a really hard time to deal with reflections and transparencies because it doesn't know what that is. It just sees the object and draws an outline. With ray tracing, instead of making a fixed shadow based on an origin point and an object, what you can do is you can realistically see how the light works. So you're firing photons, you're firing pixels of light at the scene. These pixels bounce around as much as they can, and then you keep track of the paths they take and all the properties they collect. So the photon is going through the space, hits glass. It knows that the properties of that glass material are a certain transparency, a certain refraction that will change the path of the light and also the color because it will act as a filter. So if you have a green glass, then that filter will be used and the light on the other side will have a green shine to it. So all these properties are collected. And then you can use all the properties of all the photons you fired at the scene, and you can put those together to create a realistic result. The same with reflections. If it hits a reflective surface, it will bounce off, it will collect the properties from the other side, and you will know what the color is that is being reflected in the surface. We'll see a bit of that when we build the final scene. You'll be able to see like what I'm talking about now. In the end result is realism. But you can hear me talking about it. It's about firing photons, keeping track of properties. It's a lot of computational power that's required. So the more realism you want in your scene, the more photons you fire at the scene, the more complex and big your scene is, the more objects, all that stuff makes it harder to compute. And that's where um, your hardware comes into account. To do this, you need pretty decent hardware. I can do it on my laptop, but when I'm doing the ray tracing, I can't really do much else because it's kind of taking up most of my CPU and GPU power, and it already takes a little while. So usually when you are using these exports, you are doing the exports on a separate system than the one you're working on. Usually a system that is a little bit stronger in the GPU capacity than the one you're working on. And that way you can do the renders somewhere else and keep working normally on your own workstation. That's why there's a separate application with iC3D called Render Manager that you can run on a separate system. Okay, so that's pretty much all the talking I'm going to do with the presentation right now. We're going to get into the practical demo. What you see on the screen now is a ray traced result of the packaging we're trying to create today. So we're going to do something similar to this. You might recognize the box because it's the same design we used in the Picador demo. Okay, this is iC3D. This is the application face completely blank. You can already see there's a lot of stuff on here. iC3D kind of likes a big screen. I'm working on my laptop screen now, so it's a smaller screen. As you can see, it gets a little bit crowded. If you have a big screen, this doesn't look quite so busy. It has a whole bunch of separate windows. We can see here in the list, all of these windows are active, some are still not active. So all of these are somewhere on the screen. The layout of your screen, you can completely change if you want to. So if I don't want to have these three separate windows at the bottom, I can take them out, put them somewhere else, and I can change the layout of my application. But this layout kind of works. For us today, the most important thing will be the templates. Templates are ways to get started with certain packaging types. So I'm going to work with carton folders today. But other templates are, for example, pouches, different types of bags, the creation of bottles or completely custom shapes, shrink sleeves. All of these options are available. But for today, we're looking at the carton folder. To use a template, just grab one and drag it onto the scene like this. It opened up on my different screen. So there we are. This is the carton template. It still looks kind of blank, doesn't it? Now I can just import my design that I got from Picador. We created a cat box in Picador the last time, 2 weeks ago. So I can import that dieline. I have it here. I think this PDF is the one I'm looking for, so you might recognize this. This is the Picador export we created at the very end of the Picador demo. I can open that up. And it asks me to assign colors. If you remember, in Picador, when you use the colors for cut and crease, these colors are exported in the PDF as spot colors and layers. And I have these 4 colors that I had in my Picador template available to choose from. This makes it easy for me now to use that design because I can simply say, well, all the red lines are my cut lines and all the blue lines are my fold lines. So I can pre-assign these and it makes it easy. Now, of course, I still have 2 objects. So I'll clean this up a little bit. I don't need all of this right now. So I'll just delete that line 2. I don't need any of these measurements. So I can delete all of that too. I'm just selecting by dragging my cursor over it and then deleting with my delete key. There we go. That's already a lot cleaner. I can zoom in a bit more. I don't need this either, or this, or this. And then the more difficult thing to remove properly is these lines. So I'll just select them with shift click, take them all out. Then I can zoom out again and zoom in on the other side. I can use a box here, I think. Yeah, nice. And then I have a few more of those lines over here. I'll delete the first few and then draw a box around here. I think I'm missing still one at the bottom here. Yes, there's still a really small line. Okay. So depending on how complex your packaging is, how good your design, your drawing is, this might take a second to clean up. With the Picador box, it actually wasn't that hard. And all my lines are predefined. So if I select one of these purple lines, I can see at the top here that that is already defined as a fold line. And if I select one of the green lines, I can see it's already defined as a cut line. Now I can define my drawing. I can make it better by splitting the lines here. This will make sure that the application recognizes, I think, yeah, it's doing stuff at the bottom here, recognizes the design you have. It tracks the shape. It makes sure that all the creases and cuts connect properly and that it contains one nice piece of cardboard. So that takes a second. And when it's done, we will see that piece of cardboard appear on the right side in the preview box. So it's still going. You can see I still have that window that I had. This is also just defined as a cut line. I have a few lines at the bottom here that are kind of defined as both cut and crease. Maybe I should clean those up and make those just crease lines, but it should be fine. Almost there. There we go. Okay, so now we have this piece of cardboard. I can click Generate Model. You can see it's detecting all the different faces of the box. And we get our box on the other side. And we just get a 3D preview of a piece of cardboard. Now, the color of this cardboard and the way that the sides are defined with their corrugated look is all due to the material that is selected. And at the moment, let me just see if I can show you that drop-down menu a little bit better. Here we go. In the substrate box, I have selected a flute, an E flute with a certain thickness. It's a brown one as well, so it's visible. I can select, for example, this white board, which is thinner. And with this material, we will see that one side is white and the other is brown. Of course, we are able to change all of these materials down the line in the application itself. So over here, the most important thing is really just the thickness of the board. So I'll pick this one again. And then one more thing that I have to do here is I have to define what is the front of my box, because that's important down the line when I'm using the design in my 3D space. So I'll select a face of my box and I'll click the button to define that face as the front face. There we go. Now there's a little eye on there. And now I can still fold it up. So obviously all of these faces are going to be folded 90 degrees. So I'll select all of those, put in 90, and we can see the box immediately fold itself up. At the bottom, well, this is always a little bit difficult because these things are never really 90 degrees. I think all of these ones are going to be slightly more than 90, so maybe 91 or 92 degrees. And then I have these lines. This is going to be a little bit of a pain to select. I think I missed still a piece at the top there. That should do it. Might be like -1 or -2, and that would create kind of the view where part of the design is, I was trying to zoom in, there we go, is slightly hollow on the bottom, which is typically what you get with these kinds of locks. So I'll take all of those and I'll also put those at -2. There we go. So that bottom is now slightly pushed inward, and then all I have left is the top. So I'll go back to this tool. I'll fold up these last few lines. Now I can decide whether I want the stop to be completely closed or not. So I can just select all of these lines and make them 90. But then my box is just completely closed and kind of boring. I might also just keep that open a little bit, so I could make this line, instead of 90, go to maybe 75, and then my box is slightly open. It depends on what you're trying to achieve. It might be completely open. So that's all it all depends on how you want your scene to end up. Okay, so I'm done with this box. As usual, I would suggest saving stuff when you're working with the application, with any application really. So you might want to save intermediary steps. So let's say that I want to reuse this design or these settings, or keep the cleaned up part of it. I might have to reopen this box at some point. So it's useful to save this information. I'll click Save. I'll make a new folder in here called demo. And in the demo, I will save this information box, and I will make it folded because it actually saves that information as well. And I'll save it into the CTD format. Now, if at some point I have to reopen this design and restart with the creation of my box, I can just say load, and I can pick that up, that CTD format, and I can reopen this box from here. So that helps. Then I can just say add model to scene, and I have my box here in my 3D scene. Now, actually, if you remember the Picador session, or if you weren't there, you'll find out now. I actually have two objects that I used in my Picador session. I created an insert for the bottle that I used. So I will grab my Carton fold up again, drag it back into the scene. I will get a new one of these. I'll have to import my dieline again. I'll take the same box that I used before, but instead of using the left one, I'm going to keep the right side, which is the insert. So I'll just delete all of these, then all of this thing at the bottom, and these two circles. There we go. I can say split lines. So that might again take a second. And then I can import that one as well, again, with the defined folding angles and all of that stuff. I like to get most of my stuff into my scene pretty early when I'm working on something, because then you see how everything relates to each other. And then I can work step by step on all the artwork and materials and stuff from there. Okay, so I have my little insert here. I can say generate model. That will give me this piece of cardboard. And then I'll have to define a front. So I'll make this my front face, because that's the same front direction that I had on my other box. And then I can fold up all the lines that need folding. Now, I already know kind of where I'm going with this, so I don't have to think too much about how I want to fold all these angles. I even already pre-calculated what this angle has to be, which is 114. And of course, then this one has to be minus 114. And you see where it's going, right? This creates this fold here. Then I have to create both of these, I think would be just 90. They might be minus 90. No, they're 90, it's fine. And then I still have these two lines, which are also 90. And that kind of gives me my folded insert. Of course, any of these angles can still be changed inside iC3D as long as you're working with them as cartons. So again, I would save this, I would say save, and then call this inserts underscore folded. And since I used the capital letter earlier, I'll do that again. Save. There we go. And then I'll say add model to scene. And now I have two objects in my scene. You can see they each appeared a little bit on their own space. Now, no worries, I'll grab my box and I'll ground it. In the transform tab, I can see that my Carton tab has opened itself. So I can put that somewhere, maybe in here, so it's out of the way. And then this thing became very big suddenly. There we go. So I can select this box and I can ground it in the transform tab. And that will give it, that will put it on Y0 with the base. So you can see now the Y position of my box is actually pretty high. It's now at 249, but it puts the 0 points on the base. So now if I take the insert and I ground it, they'll end up on the same height. And this is a good way to make sure that your entire packaging is kind of in the same area. It's all on the same level. And when you create a scene, especially when you start working with light and shadow, it's really nice that they're on the same plane, because otherwise these shadows look weird. So I have my two objects now. Now I put them on the right side. If I use hotkeys, I can use F, L, R, T, B to look at all the different faces of the box. So if I look at F, then I'm in my front view. I can take this one and I can use the move tool to move it sideways until it's in the right spot. Or if I want to do the math, I can do the math and move it appropriately. Then I can use L or R to look at a different face, and I can put it on the right side. Oh, really? I thought I had it all calculated out correctly. It looks like it's not actually completely correctly folded yet. If I put the bottom face against it, the top one is actually not touching yet. Okay, so that means I have to change these angles. So I can go to my carton options. I can select any one of these faces, and you can see this one is the one that's folded by 114, and this one as well. And if I change these values, you can see the entire box will move. So I'm moving that bottom face now. They're all moving in relation to that face that I selected as the front face. So maybe 13 would do it. Is that better? And And there I go and say that I used math to figure this out. Well, now you know I was lying. I think my application doesn't want to show me the transform tools anymore. Transform, there we go. And I'll put this against it again. Is this better? Might be. Yes, I'll consider this better. Okay, so in top view, I can now put that box inside of this box. I'll take a tool again and I'll put it inside. There we go. Cursor, front face. It's still kind of coming out at the bottom. You know what? I'll load in the file that I did correctly beforehand, and then we don't lose any more time with trying to figure that one out. So after this, we have our two boxes. We have the insert and the box itself, and now we can start looking at the materials again. Because these are cardboard objects, they actually have three materials. They have a mesh for the inside, a mesh for the outside, and a mesh for the side of the box, because all of these three can be separate material. They can have a separate feel to it. So if I open this up, I can see I have white card, brown card, and a flute side texture for my box. So I can look at this material and I'll be able to see all the different meshes that are included in this. Usually when you have a single object, for example, if I were to open up a beer bottle and put it in the scene, then I take this beer bottle and I look at it, and it is just a single mesh with a single material, and the material is this brown glass. So that makes it easy to work with. But yes, I want to delete the selected object. With this one, I have multiple meshes because each of these has to be able to move in relation to the other when I start playing with the folds, and they have their own material. But I can just take this material and I can look at it. So this white card material is a paper substrate for the ray tracer, which makes sense. So I'll leave that in paper. It has a diffused color, a specular color, a certain shininess, transparency, roughness, and all that. And we can change these values. So if I prefer this box to be maybe a dark gray, then I can just select a dark gray. If I want this box to be really, really shiny, I can make it really, really shiny. Of course, that doesn't make much sense for paper, so I'll put that back on a lower value. I can also increase the roughness if I like it to be rougher. All of these values, most of these, will only have an effect when you use the ray tracer. So much of this information you can't actually see do anything before we work with ray tracing. You can go a lot further with materials. You can use holographic textures. You can use lenticular effects. You can actually add bump maps and diffuse maps and transparency maps to go really fancy. But for this quick demo, we're going to stick to some of the basics. Now I'll say save, and that saves my changes to the material used in this particular model. So it's not going to mess with the next time you want to use that material. So I'll open up the inside, the brown card as well. And I'm going to make that also kind of a dark color because I'm not going to put artwork on that. So I'm going to make it like a darkish blue. Let's call it a special effect for a coating or something used for that paper. And I'll say OK. And then we'll go to the insert. So I can close this model up. I can open up the other one. Typically, I advise you to rename these models properly. So I would double click this and call this one the box, and I'll double click the other one and call it the insert. Why? Because otherwise they're all called Carton template, and then you have no clue which model you're looking at when you're working with your object. And again, I'll double click the white card. I'll make this one somewhat of a dark color, a different color from the black, so you can actually see the difference there. I'll say OK. Save, and I guess I have to do that with the brown as well, even though we can't really see it. I'll also make that a nice dark shade of blue. There we go. So now all of these have a certain material. Okay, I'll say save, then that closes, and now that I have my two boxes in my scene, I can look at how I want to use the artwork here. So there's a simple link with Illustrator, and actually I think I might, before I do that, open up a separate file. So let me just open up the file where the insert is actually correctly folded instead of the one where it pokes out a little bit. I'll say yes, use that one. I'm not sure if I already changed the materials there. No, I did not change the materials yet, but at least they're correctly folded here. Actually, I did change materials. I just didn't change the brown one because it doesn't matter. Okay, so you see I have two dark colors inside with the insert, and I have the box, and it's slightly open in this one. Then I select the model that I want to put artwork on. With Carton boxes, it's easy because the entire thing is already automatically a label. If you were to use bottles and you want to add actual labels to them, then you can just use the button to add a label. And then I can say, oh, I want to have a label with a certain size on a certain mesh. Normally, this is just a bottle. And then you'll have a label there. But with a box, the entire thing is a label. So I can just click the Illustrator link. Or if you want to work with PDFs, you can use the PDF link. I don't need to catch up with what's new in Illustrator right now. And then I have this front of my box. You can see it says Carton artwork front and Carton artwork back. Some of my names here have changed to French because I have been doing some French language trainings in iC3D, and I changed the language recently. Now I happen to have this artwork prepared because if you remember, um, this is the same artwork I used for the Picador class. So I'll unlock all of these so I can actually copy them. Then I'll copy this entire thing and I'll put it on my artwork front. You can see I have two different files, one for the front and one for the back. So I can add artwork to the back if I want to. I'm just not going to. Then I put this in place, which is something like this. Of course, normally you would have bleed, um, but I did not make bleed. And I put it like this. Okay, there we go. I have my artwork on my design. You can see all the nice guides that it had. So I have two layers. I have a layer with the guides on it and a layer with the artwork, which is where I just pasted all this new information. Then when I have all this stuff on here, I can just click open the iC3D plugin. I can say update now, and we will see it says up to date. If I switch back to iC3D, we see my box now has artwork on it, which is perfectly placed. So there we go. That is artwork. Now, of course, this artwork can contain anything that you can put in Illustrator. So if you use images, vectors, text, anything that you put in your Illustrator artwork can be completely synced to iC3D. And it can go even further if your model happens to be an irregular size. For example, you have a bag or you have a shrink wrap around 6 bottles, for example, and you have the deformation that you would see in that shrink wrap, you can actually do the deformation in the artwork required to make it look correct on the shrink wrap. These are also tools that are already included in Illustrator. In this model, it won't have any effect, but if I, for example, take this object and I go to object, I have a tool here, envelope distort. I can say make with the mesh, then I can tell it to make a mesh with X by X grids, and then it will automatically pre-distort the image to end up correct on my mesh. Of course, this is a flat face of my box, so it wouldn't have any effect here. But that is a tool that is included in the iC3D plugin. Okay, then the next thing that we can do with this artwork, because this is kind of bland, is we can play with the spot colors. So for example, I have this nice aged for 14 years on the side, and I have, if I get this in view, I have this whiskey on the top of it. Now with Carton, with finishing effects, I could make this box look fancier if I have some embossing on it, embossing and foil effects on it. So let's say I want to emboss these 14 and whiskey, and I also want to put them in foil. Well, I can do that. I just have to select my model. So I have it selected. I can go to my layers and I can click the little star icon here. this effects layer will look for spot colors in my Illustrator file. So you can see I have a few. I have a blue, a white, and a yellow spot color in my Illustrator file. Now, these names correspond exactly with the names that I used for my spot colors here. So I have white, blue, and yellow spot color here as well. And some of my objects use these colors. So now that I have those in my packaging design, I can use them here. I'll start by saying I want to have a foil emboss, and I'll say a silver foil emboss because I'm going to start with that white color we see in the 14 and the whiskey. So I select that color, and then I can select the material. I've already spoken about the fact that you can use materials like paper, metal, glass, etc. Um, I already changed the material for my box manually, but we have a whole library here on the bottom left that uses all these little cow icons to represent materials. I can select any material in that library. So if I want to use a silver foil, I could look for like aluminum foil, for example. That's an easy option to take. I could use a just a fancy shiny metal. Any of these materials is just a material from the library. I'm going to go with aluminum foil because it works actually pretty well for this. And I don't need to keep the spot color, but I can use the spots as the color of the effect if it's something that has that feature. Then I'll say OK. We'll see it accepts this, and now it's loading it into the file. This sometimes takes a little seconds to actually visualize the effect. We see, I don't think it's there yet. No, it's still looking a little bit blue. And if I want to change the look of this, I can still open up the material itself and change it here. So for example, it starts out with a really big bump depth. I don't need this to be 50. I can probably have this on like 20 and look plenty high. I don't have any transparency necessary. I always like to add a little bit of roughness. And then we have quite a lot of shininess. Save. Let's see if it picks it up. Probably still loading. It takes a little while. There we go. It's doing it now because it's there we go, because it took my controls for a second. So now if we look at this 14 and we open that up, oh, there we go. If we open this up in the system, we can see that this 14 now has little highlights and shadow effects. So we can see shadows at the bottom, highlights on the left and the right. So it looks like it's a little bit higher than the rest of the packaging. And also, if I move this around, you see that it changes in lightness. It goes from very white to gray. That's, of course, the reflection of the foil. So I can play with this. Now, this box has been designed with 3 spot colors. These little line effects, the 4-piece line effects that I have on the bottom and around the hole also have effects. So I can, again, select my box, click the little star icon, so choose my blue spot color, and I'll call this blue emboss. And I'll make that, I think I can use a painted metal. Let's look for blue. Blue frosted, blue washi paper. No, that's all not very good. I think I have a red painted metal. This is hard to look like this. I'll use the categories. I'll go for metals, and I should give me, there we go, a smaller list of items. Let's use anodized red as a starter. I can say keep spot color where possible, and then I can change this, and I can make this change color so it uses a red color right now. I'll have to choose painted as a metal type, and I can change this to be blue, and I can make that use the same blue that I used before. I can say OK, save, and now that will use the color I had before. There we go. Well, actually, I made it foil again. It didn't even have to be foil. and you can see it's actually shiny. And I think it also automatically already added an embossing. Let's make sure. No, no bump tapped. I'll make that slightly embossed. Save. There we go. And now it also has the embossing. And you can see it's also completely here in the 4-piece. You can see it's all embossed and blue and shiny now. And I could do the same for the yellow spot, but that's really only used for this one line at the back. So maybe let's just skip that and get on with the bottle. So when I'm kind of happy with the way my box looks, I'll get in my bottle. Um, of course, with the application, you don't have to create everything from scratch. You can use existing stuff. And I actually do that quite a lot when I'm working with iC3D. You have a whole model library here on the bottom right that already contains a whole bunch of existing 3D models. Oftentimes, you can just take something and maybe steal part of it, or use the entire thing as is. For example, I happen to know that I have in my list, I have spirit bottles, and I even have a whiskey malt bottle. And I can just open that up. And that happens to be purely coincidental, I swear, the exact bottle that I happened to use in my Picador demo 2 weeks ago. So I'm able to use this bottle and put that inside my box. So I'll go back. I think my application changed size there. Yeah, I go back to the transform. I can ground it, which puts it on the same level as my box. I can go to the top view. Let's put that a bit more in the center so I can actually see what I'm doing. I can use the move tool to center it out a bit. So something like this is probably centered. I can go back to the front view. You can see it's inside. Oh, didn't change my tool there. Undo, change the tool, and move it back. Of course, it's still a bit too big for my design here. So I can use the scale tool, and you see every time I change one of these tools, it actually gives me other options here on the right. So I'm going to change the bottle to be 80 mils wide, to be, I think, 260 high, and another 80 in depth. And I think if we just cheat a little bit and pull it out, oh, didn't change the tool again. Go away, zoom bar. There we go. I can undo this again. I can use this tool again. And let's pull it out and see where it is. It's a bit too high, so let's dump it down a little bit. And that puts it inside my box. No, I did it a tiny bit too low. Tiny bit higher. There we go. And then put it back inside the design. Just like this. Okay. Front, yeah. So now my bottle is inside my box. Now, of course, I'm not actually ready with this yet, but I put all my stuff where I want it to be. Now, I kind of want to work on the bottle a little bit. So what I can do is I can take these models and I can make them invisible. So I can take these and hide them. So I'm only looking at my bottle right now, but everything else still exists exactly where I left it. So that allows me to change stuff with the bottle. Now, this bottle, because it came from the library, already comes with content. So it's already filled with a liquid. And if I open up the model, we can see that we have a second object inside our main object. And that object is purely the mesh for the liquid. And this is the mesh for the glass. So I already have those two. Now I want to add a bit of a label on top of this bottle. So what I'll do is I'll click the new label button. I'll say I want that to be just on the mesh, so I'll exclude the fill. I'll call this bottle label, just so I know what's happening. I can make this a certain width and height. Let's do 80 by 80. And I'll say OK. And that creates this white label. And I can just take that and move that around. And I can put it anywhere on the bottle that I want it to be. But of course, we like to be slightly accurate. So I'll grab the label, I'll go to label settings, and I'll say that I want my alignment to be center, front, center, apply. Now that's way too high for me, so I'm going to offset this label with a certain amount. And I think I have to make this negative. So let's do minus 50 apply. I think that's kind of going in the right direction. Let's just make the box visible again so I can see where it ends up. There it goes. No, it's actually too low. I need it to be higher. So let's go plus another 10. Enter. Where does that put me? Way too high. So that's minus 40, I guess. Yeah, that's kind of okay. It's probably still a little bit much. Let's do 35. Would be nice if I had all these numbers written down and ready for me to look at right now. Okay, so I have that label on my bottle and it's kind of in the window where I wanted it to be. So I can make this box hidden again. I can take this label, select it, and click the Illustrator link. And that gives me the exact same label in Illustrator. Now again, I cheated. I have prepared a file that I can use here, and I'll dump that on top of my box. Let's just do it the way exactly it was. Let's just center it completely. Now with labels, you can do more than what we could do with just the box. We can use the cutout function right here. And with that cutout function, we can create a shape in which the label is cut when it's put on the bottle, and everything else is going to be transparent. So you can see it like a clipping mask. And if I go back to this file, I might actually have that. I totally do. Look at me being a complete professional. I have this all ready here. So I can steal that as well and go back to my other file. Back to this one, I have the layer for that right here. So if I select that layer and I paste this, we should have that exactly where it needs to be. So this is just a mask. So if I turn both of them on and I select my iC3D and click update now, we should see when it says up to date and I switch back to iC3D. There we go. We now have a label on this bottle and it is nicely cut out in the shape of my mask that I had there before. And again, I have a spot color in there that I'm going to turn into foil. So I'm going to make this whiskey be the same kind of foil we had on the bottle. So if you were already dozing and falling asleep in the previous session, in the previous part of it, you can pay attention now. I select the label, I select the little star icon. That gives me a pop-up which contains my spot colors. I call this foil. I select the material, which would be foil aluminum. I can say OK. It might take a second to update, but in the meantime, I can change the material so it's plenty shiny. It has a certain refraction. I always like a little bit of roughness because it adds. I do not need any bump depth on that label though, so I'm going to turn that back down to 0. And then I say save, and now we will see the moment updates that this turns from the light blue it is now all the way to a very shiny foil. And then let's just put my application back in the right size. Can't be more narrow. I set the application like the pretty wide screen. It's updating. I can turn on the box in the meantime. Show model, inserts, show model. Let's see if everything keeps up. There we go. That should be everything visible. So you see now that I have the insert, which is allowing my bottle to go through it. I have the box around the bottle and I have all my labels in place and I can move this around and see it as a complete scene. But of course, iC3D is not the application to play with 3D modeling. It's the application to create nice exported images. So I'm kind of going to set a little scene here. I have my box, which is nice and present. I want to have a background that is not just this white to gray area. I want to have a bit of an image there. So I can go to my background and I can actually choose an environment to use. So if I click environment or dynamic image, which is probably better, or both, I can choose a background. And I have a few backgrounds available. I'll just use the same one I used in the picture that I have on my in my presentation, which is this one. And that gives me this bar table. Now, of course, you can create your own images. You can add images to this that you make, let's say, in a shop or in a showroom or whatever you want to use, a supermarket, for example. And you can place your objects inside your own supermarket. Now, since I'm also casting my screen on Zoom, my computer is getting a slightly harder time listening to me. So we'll see how responsive it is for everything. Okay, so I have my bottle kind of in the way I want it to be. That is fine. And then, did I lose the color on there? Not sure. And then I want to add that glass because that looks pretty good as well. So I'll go back to my model library. I'll go to my list of items. And I think if I go to cups, I have a bunch of glasses, and I actually have a whiskey glass, um, which is all ready for use. So I'll put that in there. That gives me this glass. I'll have to go back to my transform tool and put it on the same plane. So I'll ground it. That puts it way up here. And then I can use the red and blue vectors to move it on the X and Z axes to put it somewhere that I like it to be, which is slightly in front of the box to make it seem a lot bigger. Now, that's a lot of whiskey to drink in a glass like that, so I'm going to add some ice and drink it on the rocks. Again, this is something that I can take out of my library. This is something that already exists, but as usual, um, most of these things you can just create them. So if you don't find what you need already in existence, you can just create an object you want. So if I wanted to create my own custom glass, for example, I could create it from scratch. Let's just take these ice cubes, put them on the table. Now they're over there. So I'll select them, I'll ground them, and then I'll move them inside the glass. iC3D is all about simulating. So whatever you do, it doesn't have to be completely perfect. It doesn't have to be done the exact right way. As long as it's in the right position and it looks the way you imagine whatever you're doing to look. The fact that I just used my top view to place the ice is going to mess with the positioning of my scene. So I'm going to have to fix where it is in a minute, but it's okay as long as I get the ice in the correct spot. So let's just put my top view kind of centered so I can put the ice in the glass. There we go. Back to my move tool. Slightly more down. Too much. There we go. And slightly to the right. And it's in the glass. Perfect. Back to my other cursor. Frontal view. Put it on the table. Oh, it might actually be through the glass. I'll have to see in a second. And zoom in again. I hope the video quality of the Zoom call is actually doing well because my laptop is really trying to lift off at the moment. Okay, zoom in a little bit more. And then give it a little turn. Just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to again open up a file where I already have this kind of setup. That helps with not having to move stuff completely correctly. Yes, I will continue. And again, normally what you would do is what I see. You see this name, it says plus, 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 plus. That means that I saved several versions of this every time that I changed something major. And that way, whenever I have something that I have to look at, I can just fix it by reopening something I already had. So this is the exact same thing that I was just doing. It's just positioned kind of neatly. And so we have our scene all set up. So we have our box, we have our bottle in its shape, we have our glass with the ice in it, and then we get ready to create our image. And like I said, it's something that we can look at in more detail in a different session. But you can create these kind of things from scratch. So if I want to create a very specific glass, for example, I could use in the template library either the 2D spinner to create something. Oh, I scrolled on the page, didn't I? Just a little bit. Okay. I can either use the 2D spinner and then create a perfectly circular object that is spun around the y-axis, or I can use the 3D modeler and create something that can have an irregular shape and build that up from the base with whatever shapes it has. And we have done so in a cafe in the past. Some people might have been present at that cafe. Um, but we're not really going to go into that now because we're already kind of going over time. So the last thing to do here would be to create our exported image. And we can just go to File, Export. Now we have a bunch of options. Again, multiple ways to share this file with your customers. And I'll say high-res image, which is to create a ray-traced image export of the file. Of course, I can save presets for this export, so you can have consistent exports. You can also export multiple images every time you export instead of just one. I'll create an image that is about, let's not make it too big so my computer doesn't explode. That is about, let's say, 800 by 800 pixels at 300 pixels per inch using an Adobe RGB ICC profile and using 128 samples in my ray tracer. I can say export. It's going to ask me to give this file a name. So I'll call this scene export. Actually, before I do that, let me check it that I didn't turn on the alpha channel. No, okay, so it's not going to be transparent. Then I'll say scene export and I'll put it on my desktop, save. And now it's going to send the file to basically a hot folder on my desktop because, like I said in the beginning, the ray tracer is actually acting as a separate application. So that means that I don't have to have my iC3D open. I don't even have to be working on the same computer as where my ray tracer is working. I'll open up the render manager as soon as it's done exporting. If you have any questions, anything about the application that you would like to ask, this is definitely the time to do so because the ray tracing is just a bunch of waiting while it happens before we can see the result. So please unmute yourself, speak up, or put something in the chat. I actually have it open this time so I can see if you put something in the chat. In the meantime, what I'll do is I'll open the render manager. Render manager, which is this separate application. No questions at all? Was I really so clear the entire presentation, or can you guys just not hear me anymore? So see, I have one file waiting to be exported, which is the file I just asked it to do. And then I'll say start this one up. Is there a way to automate the production to allow different images to be placed? If you have a very regular product, so let's say that I always have bottles, like boxes for bottles that are the same dimensions like this. I always have this kind of box that I created just now for this whiskey bottle. Or if you always have a similar bag that is filled with a different product, let's say it's a chips bag and you have different flavors of chips, for example, yes, then what you can do is you can just create your scene completely finished with everything you want to do. Simply select the bag, select the Illustrator link, and change the artwork and say sync. And it will put your new artwork on your model, and you'll have your new design with the new thing. And this is kind of the idea behind creating catalogs using iC3D. If you're always looking at very similar things, but with a different artwork on it, you can just have a set scene with a set angle with everything the way you want it, usually with either a transparent background or a white colored background, and then just change the artwork and keep exporting images. Like I said, for the render manager, you can also set a list of angles you want to shoot at. So if you want to have multiple zoom levels and multiple angles, like standardized angles, always 30 degrees skew and 30 degrees angles, then you can have those standardized images. And that way your catalog would actually look with all the images being pretty much identical. And that's
Okay.
a way to automate production. It's
Well,
I see you've
thank you.
unmuted, so maybe you can.
Yes. Actually, I was wondering because the question is mostly for well, to have packages in different languages. So you'll have automatically, for example, a creation of all your packages in all the languages that you need them, but then you just need to be able to place them in
Yeah, so I think that
preferably in an automated way onto
yeah,
the
I
scene.
don't
So
think you can place them in an automated way, but I think the easiest way to do it would be to have your packaging open, to have all your languages as layers in your Illustrator documents, and then simply putting one layer invisible and one layer visible
mhm.
when you sync your artwork. Then you can export, make the other layer visible, and so on until you have all your exports.
So you could maybe script it in Illustrator so you can perform that. Yeah.
That might be possible, but then you would also still have to have someone in iC3D who is sending the files to the render manager, right?
Hmm.
So you can probably script the Illustrator part, but I don't think you can script the iC3D part where you do the file export high-res image settings.
Hmm. That would be a nice option though.
So halfway there, I guess.
Yes, because if you would use Switch, for example, in the end, then you could perform that with Switch. Then
Yeah,
you could fully do that automatically.
yeah. There's another question about the materials. It's a very long list of materials. I haven't really scrolled through it yet, but you can see there are really a lot of materials in here. And of course, you have the option to create your own materials as well. And the question is there a way to use keywords or is there a way to search for specific things? And yes, there is. For one thing, you can use the drop down that has categories. So if you're looking for glass, for example, I can select the glass drop down, and then I only have the existing options that are defined as glass. Where is that definition? Well, if I select, for example, this glass of whiskey on the table, and I open it up, we have two materials there. We have the material which is the glass and the material which is the liquid. If I double click the glass material, you can see the ray tracing substrate is set as glass. And these are the categories. So if you say glass, then the ray tracer is going to examine that object when light goes through it as if it were glass and act in a certain way. And that is how you can find stuff. So if you make your own design here, you just create a new material, you can actually put it in a category and you can use certain settings and you can find it afterwards. And of course, there's also a search bar. So if I'm looking for something red, then I can type red. I can set this to all categories and I can see everything that hits with the red search word. And everything, these front ones are being hit because they have hammered, squared, so they all end with red, which is kind of a bummer. Let's put a space there. Okay, now I have less options. So yeah, it's possible to search within the materials. Actually, the ray tracer has finished in the meantime. So let me show you what our resulting 800 by 800 pixel image looks like. It's on the desktop. This is the image that was just exported. So apparently in that export, I didn't add the ice yet. But you can see how the light goes through the glass. It takes the color of the whiskey, and then it also shows you quite hard the foil in the logo and the shadows created by the window here in the box. So the back of the box is really causing a lot of shade here, which kind of gives it a nice effect. So that is a possible export. I do have exports that I created, like the one I have in the presentation, which, for example, with the ice and at a higher resolution, looks like this. And then you see that the ice is in there and it also has its own texture. And you can see, for example, in this ice cube, the yellow of the box is actually visible because it happens to break that way. And it happens to refract with the color of the yellow in there. That makes it a very realistic result. And there's lots of things you can do to get these extra realism. One of them is, for example, that you can have spritzing on an ice cold can of soda, for example, which is the little water droplets that appear on the side of the can. Okay, So we've been going over time. If you have any more questions, anything else you want to see, please let us know. I can answer some more questions now. I'm not sure if we can show more stuff at this moment exactly, but we can always set up another demo or add an extra cafe. Nobody's speaking up. Luke, I think I can't hear you. I'm not sure if your audio is correct. Still nothing.
Thanks a lot, Michiel.
No problem, Chris. I see Luke is trying to ask us something, but I think the audio is not working correctly. If you want, you can put it in chat again. My pleasure. Yeah, so we're coming back again. We're pretty much doing cafes every week nowadays. So we have another one next week. I am honestly not exactly sure what the subject is. Some might be able to tell us, or you can find it on the website.
Yeah, so next week's cafe will be done by our CTO, David van Driessen, on how to do JavaScript in nFocus Switch.
There we go.
So we hope to see you all there.
And of course, there will be more cafes in the future. We have a thing set that I might spoil by mentioning it. I'm looking at Sam's face to see if he minds. But we're going to do something about color in the future. A set of webinars. I think we're going to do 3, each with a week in between, about the basics of color and color management. So if you're interested in that, keep an eye out. We will be sending out lots of marketing material containing the dates of this. And feel free to join us then as well. Okay, then I wish you all a very pleasant evening. I hope you found this interesting. And as always, if you want to have an extra demo, if you have any more questions that pop up in the future, or if you're interested in actually testing the product, let us know. We can help you get a trial, we can get you started, and we can answer all your questions.